Hello and welcome to our weekly Shiur on the Parsha with the commentary of the Alshich. This week's Shiur is dedicated for the refuah shlema of Yecheskel Yehuda ben Yenta, who should have a complete and total recovery. And if you'd like to sponsor the Shiur, as usual, and for somebody you love who's maybe not well, or to celebrate a simcha, or to commemorate somebody who's passed away, then that's the address, yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com. And by all means, please be in touch. Okay, now this week's Parsha is, of course, Shemos, a whole new chapter, a whole new book in the Chumash, and a whole new story for the Jewish people. One, of course, of great tragedy and pain and suffering, the beginning of the enslavement of the Jewish people, 210 years in Egypt. There is a very interesting point which Rebbetzin Sipora Heller often makes in her shiurim, and I think it's well worthy of our attention for just a few seconds. She says, as a general rule, you have to understand that people way back in antiquity in the ancient world weren't actually any more or any less clever than you and I are today. They maybe technologically have been much less able, to put it mildly, but that doesn't really say when it comes to wisdom and basic psychology or advanced psychology, the understanding of the human condition, that doesn't mean to say that they were any less wise and clever and adept and able as you and I living in the 21st century in 2021. It might be exactly the opposite. And indeed, if we just remind ourselves how the Sefer starts, and for that I'll have to share my screen with you, I think we can very soon make a case through the eyes of the Alshich that Rebbetzin Heller's suspicion about the ancient world is well proven and well borne out. So I'll share the screen with you. And there we go. So if I can, I don't think you can shrink this. Oh, you can, good. There we go. Here's the beginning of the story. These are the names of the children of Yaakov's children that went down to Egypt. Shivim Nofesh, it says here 70 souls. Shouldn't I say 70 souls? But okay, we'll come back to that. And then it says, V'yokom melech chodesh al Mitzrayim. And a new king rose up over Egypt. Shelo Yoda Yosef didn't know Joseph. But Yomer al Amli said to his people, Ani Am b'nei Yisrael rov v'otzim emenu. And these Jewish people are more numerous and mightier than we are. Let us be wise with them, unless they multiply. And when Mulchama, war, befalls us, they'll add or they'll join our enemies and leave and go out from the land. So therefore, straight after that, the Yasima Alom, Nisim, they put on them, over them, taskmasters, and the enslavement begins. Now, of course, there's a lot going on here. The Jewish people were there for 210 years. That's just like a headline. There's a lot of time contracted and compressed into that whole story. But within that story, there is a tremendous amount of this premise of Rebbetzin Heller being played out. They were clever. They knew how to get the Jewish people. So let's go straight to the Alshich. I'm not sharing the screen to show you the Alshich this time. I will just read to you the Alshich's first 5 questions. And this clever observation of the psukim that I just read through his eyes, which of course is so much more acute than mine, and perhaps even yours, will show us really what's going on. But let's look and see what he says. He says the story seems to suggest that it was just a normal sociological historical phenomenon that went on. Vayokom melech chodesh, there was a new king on Mitzrayim over Egypt. Asher lo yoda Yosef, didn't know Joseph. Now, as the Medrash quotes, Rashi quotes one of the Medrash, which says, what do you mean? It wasn't, one penny says it wasn't a new king, and the other one says it wasn't a new king. He made himself as though he was a new king, as though he didn't know Yosef, as though he had the Jewish people hadn't done many favors to him and saved his country. as though they owed nothing to the Jewish people. So it's either a new king or an old king who's pretending that he doesn't know who Yosef is. So therefore, this new king says, Yomer Elamai. So the Alshich says, it looks as though it's just talking a historical phenomenon. Somebody nasty was appointed. He didn't know the tremendous debt of gratitude that they owed to the Jewish people, and consequently mistreated them. But says the Alshich, that's clearly not true. This is not a historical thing. This clearly came from God. God, Hashem, had told Abram that this was going to happen, that there would be a land that wasn't theirs, and they were going to be afflicted. This is all part of Hashem's plan. Not as though there was a new king. The way it writes is though it was just, a political, like the rise of Hitler or Stalin or somebody like that, and this is what happened to the Jews. No, this was designed by Hashem. So that's point number one that the Alshich wants us to look at. Number two, it says, interestingly, why does it always refer to them in the singular? The Jews in the singular. Well, we just said there's lots and lots of Jews. And it said here, Shivim Nofesh, and of course, as we all know, because this has already been mentioned previously, when the Jewish people go down to Egypt, it says Shivim Nofesh earlier in Parshas, and the obvious question is it should say Shivim, because in the plural, 70, not Nefoshos. But of course, really the Jewish people are essentially one body. We are one person, essentially. And that's why it says that it refers to us as being in the singular. And really the Alshich asks or raises the question here again, because the singularity of the Jewish people, it seems to be emphasized here. So he says, look, if I go through it again, who didn't know Yosef, we've dealt with that. But Yomer El Am says to people, the Jewish people are much mightier than we. Let us be wise to him. A year, but maybe unless he multiplies, and if a war comes along, who? Then he, not they, will join us and our enemies. And they'll come bono. But Allah mina oretz. But you see what Allah, and they put on him, and not aleihem, on them in the plural. So why is it always in the singular? That's the next question the Alshich asks. Well, the first one was more of an observation, or he's questioning why the Chumash tends to write the story almost as though it's a historical account, when of course the Chumash is a religious book, and obviously should reference the fact that the incident came from Shem. Point number two, why does it keep referring to the Jewish people in the singular? Well, we've got 5 questions to go through tonight. Question number 3, he says, let's look at that again. So he says, lots of Jews, big problem. Anti-Semites always see Jews in enormous numbers. Jews everywhere, enormous numbers. Half the world's population is full of Jews. Numerous and mightier than us. Hova nischak molo. Now, hova means come, but it's in the singular. It should say hovu. Come, all you Egyptian people. And because he's speaking to his people. The Yomer El Ami says to his people, that's all the Egyptian people, that the Jewish people are mighty. That's hovu, it should say, let us come, and be wise towards them. Ben year, ben less, they multiply, etc., etc. The Alshich says in that, we should have said, let us all come and be wise, because there's many of them. So why does it say in the singular? And his last question is a really very interesting question. It says what he says to them. Why doesn't it say what they said to him? Why doesn't it say what the Egyptians said to Pharaoh? So he says, war, then they'll join in with our people, with our enemies, etc., etc. So the appointed taskmasters, etc. There's no response from the Egyptian people here. Are you with me so far? So the Alshich says something which is, I think, very, very important to consider. But before we do that, let's consider this being wise to deal with the Jewish problem, the Jewish question. And incidentally, with those Nazi allusions that I just used, the Jewish problem and the Jewish question, let me just point out that the rabbis say that all the subsequent exiles of the Jewish people, the Babylonian exile and the Persian exile, the Greek exile, and eventually the Roman one, the one that we're in now, all of those were offspring of the Egyptian exile. It was the prototype of all future exiles. All of the story of Hanukkah, the story of Purim, all these have their root, their genesis in the story of the enslavement of the Jewish people in Egypt, and they would be the blueprint from which the other exiles would be drawn, or rather would be constructed. Interesting. So therefore, being wise with the Jewish people, and again, let's bear in mind what I said at the beginning, quoting Rebbetzin Heller, they weren't more stupid than us. Don't go for this caveman stuff. They were just as wise as us, and you can see that. Part of being wise, say the rabbis, or part of the wisdom, part of the strategy of the Egyptians, and certainly of Pharaoh, as we'll see for a second because it came from him, was the affliction of the Jews should launch itself by being nice to the Jews. As I said before, the Jews are going to be in Egypt for 210 years. And those 210 years are going to be periods or a period of great relaxation and integration, assimilation of the Jewish people into Egyptian society. Why? How? The Egyptians wanted it. They wanted to welcome the Jews into their society for a very simple reason: in order to be wise and defeat them. Now, Rashi points out, and you'll be probably familiar with this, when they decide to kill all the boys at birth, then the technique they used was to drown them at birth. This is a well-known story, the drowning of the boys. Why did they decide to drown them? And Rashi says they decided to drown them for the very simple reason. They knew that Hashem had brought a flood to the world, submerging the entire planet. Well, nearly. The land of Israel was not submerged. They knew that. They also knew that Hashem promised never to bring another such flood to the world. The third thing they knew about Hashem, and therefore they knew about Hashem, as I'll show you in a second, the third thing they knew about Hashem was that he always punishes mida keneged mida, measure for measure. What you do wrong, the exact same thing is done to you as the punishment. And therefore, we can checkmate Hashem by his own rules, the rules he set for the game. Because if he always punishes mida keneged mida, and we drown the boys, and he's promised never to bring another flood to the world, he won't be able to get us. So Rashi says that what they failed to understand was that the promise was not to bring a flood that would flood the entire world, but to flood a country. That would be allowed. Or a more acute answer, perhaps, or I should say acute, both acute and acute answer, is that indeed Hashem promised never to bring another flood to the world, but he never promised not to bring people to a flood, which of course is what actually happens. The Egyptians go to a flood. It doesn't flood Egypt. They go to the flood. Of course, when they're drowned, they're crossing the Red Sea. Mida keneged mida. But it clearly demonstrates that they know exactly how Hashem works. And therefore, Hoven Ischak Maloi. Let's get the Jews in a way that will, as it were, totally diffuse repercussions and also emasculate them and make sure that they're not able to fight back against us. And how did they do that? By being nice to the Jewish people, welcoming them into Egyptian society, assimilating them, and so that they would become un-Jews. So a phrase I've coined recently and written about in my newspaper columns. An un-Jew, like in the Hanukkah story, Misyavnim. The Jews became un-Jews. Like you can say somebody's an American, he's not adhering, or she's not adhering to, I've lost my light here, not adhering to American principles. Then you could say that a Jew is maybe likely a Jew, physically a Jew, but he's not adhering to Jewish principles. Same sort of idea. Let's get them to be un-Jews. And they did that by welcoming us in, and the Jewish people flooded into Egyptian society, embraced the welcome that was offered to them, and indeed became totally submerged in Egyptian society to the extent that when Moshe comes and says to the Jewish people that Hashem has appeared to me and said he's going to save you, they said, are you kidding? Said the elders, the leaders. Egypt's full of our idolatry, our avodah zarah. Egypt is a country where you'll find that the Jews worship the chief god of the Egyptians, the sheep, just like we had done, just like they had done. So that was exactly what they wanted to do. And in my translation of Shiur B'tochen of Chos Lavod, it's called Refuah Zaleh. I should, incidentally, if you'll allow me to point this out, I now sell this on Amazon. No, I'm not trying to sell the book. Well, I suppose I am. But I sell this on Amazon for a very simple reason. I noticed that somebody was selling that book, on Amazon for, you're not going to believe this, but it's true. I think it's $380 a book, a new version of the book. I mean, an unused version of the book. And so I started selling there so people wouldn't get to it. But you can look at that. You'll find Refuah Zaleh on Amazon. So please, if you're interested in this book, which is, I humbly suggest a good book and a good translation. The grey bits are my commentary, big introductions to each chapter, notes at the bottom, Hebrew, and then my translation there. I sell it for the regular price of $25. Please don't spend $400 for this fraud, and get it from me. But in my introduction, or rather my translation, I'll read to you the translation. There's no point reading the Hebrew and translating, as I've already done it. He talks about the following thing. If however a person compromises his certainty in Hashem, betochen, the word betochen, I normally translate as using Ramat Solomon, Shlita the Mashgiach of Gateshead's translation, not as trust, but certainty, your certainty. If ever a person compromises certainty in Hashem and develops even a marginal trust in someone else's wealth, wisdom, or strength, Hashem removes his involvement in that person's life relative to the proportion of trust he's invested elsewhere. That's what the Shiur B'tochen, the Chos Lavod says. Another thing they knew was that if the Jewish people tell Hashem, go away, we don't need you anymore, dismissed, he allows himself to be dismissed. And relative to the extent you want him to be out of your life, he will leave your life, including his control and intervention within your life or in your life. And that's what the Egyptians wanted. The first mitzvah the Jewish people voluntarily gave up was the mitzvah of Bris Milah, because that made us look different. That's why at the end of the story, as you obviously will remember, when the Jewish people, the Passover, when the death of the firstborn occur, etc., the Jewish people had to smear blood on the doorpost. Bloods, actually, it says, in the plural. It was the blood of Bris Milah. It was also the blood of the Paschal lamb. We'd worship the Egyptian god, which was the lamb. We had to take it, tie it to the foot of the bed for a couple of days, take it, cut its throat, cook it, and eat it. There's no greater demonstration that you have cut your connection to the worship of that animal when you eat it. People generally don't eat their gods in idolatrous circles. So that was the first thing. And then more assimilation. And the Jewish people, or rather, most of the Jewish people succumbed to that Hova Neskak Malo. Let's be wise with him. But okay, so as that is the greatest technique to make the Jewish people vulnerable, that was their wisdom. Let's get them vulnerable. Let's remove the effect that Hashem's protection that will stop us getting them. Pharaoh knew about that. Kill them with flood. That'll protect us from Midah, Keneg, and Midah. Get them to reject God. And then God says, fine, I'll be rejected. I allow myself to be rejected. And then they're vulnerable. And then we can get them. Good. So let's go back to the Alshich's 5 questions. And then we can look a little bit deeper. So the Alshich says that really, if there is a military victory, if two countries are going to war, if one beats the other, there are 4 possible factors that could have led to that victory and that success. The one is that and you see this so often historically, that the conquering power, the successful, the victorious side are unified, and the defeated side are not. Think of the First World War, and when the Russian forces collapsed in the middle of their confrontation with the Germans, for the very simple reason the Germans were unified, and they broke into a civil war. They started fighting with each other. They sued for peace, gave a huge chunk of territory to Germany, etc., etc., etc. You know, everybody knows the story. But the Russians, notice the Russians were unified during the Second World War, and they defeated the Germans. But during the First World War, that lack of unity meant that it spelled disaster for them. So the first crucial factor, says the Alshich, that guarantees the success of a military campaign or a war is the fact that one of the sides is unified. 2, God's on your side. As we say every morning in the Shiur Oz, Yoshia Moshe, then it says, Hashem ish molchana, Hashem shalom. God is a God of war. The victory, ultimately every victory, every decision which leads to the conquest of one nation over the other is designed by Hashem. So another reason that you could be successful is because you've got God on your side. How often do you think of pictures of priests blessing soldiers during the First World War or the Second World War before they're going into battle? You do want God on your side, and the old cliche about no atheist in the foxholes certainly holds true. Before you get to the foxhole, I think people are willing to hedge their bets and say, well, just in case he does exist, I certainly want him on my side. So, number 1, obviously, unity. Number 2, God on your side. Number 3, cleverness. One side's just so much cleverer than the other side. Like at the beginning of the Second World War, when the French and British forces were deployed, anticipating the arrival of German forces at the border between France and Germany, and the French just invaded the Low Countries, Holland and Belgium, and come down that way, completely cutting off the French and British. They were just clever at that stage of the war. Obviously, they got very clever generals with very clever strategies, and that would rather guarantee your victory in the battlefield. So unity, crucially important. On top of that, you've got cleverness. And I think I missed one out, didn't I? Oh yeah, sorry, Hashem, rather. Sorry, you've got unity, Hashem on your side, and cleverness. Anything else? Yeah, you're stronger and bigger. You're bigger and mightier. You've got an army 10 times the size of the opposing army. Chances are you're going to win. All 4 of those factors Pharaoh addresses. So let's go back to sharing our screen and let's have a look and see how he does that. So first of all, the Yaakov Melech Chodesh, who doesn't know Yosef, do me a favor. It's only 1 generation later, and Yosef has saved, and his father has saved Egyptian society. Yaakov has saved Egyptian society. In fact, we famously know, the Medrash says, when Yaakov came down to Egypt, the famine stopped. Whoa, he's a special person. When he comes into Pharaoh's palace, and apparently the doorway leading into the chamber in which the king Pharaoh sat was very low, so that people automatically bowed, and there was an idol there. And so he'd be bowing down to Pharaoh, who thought himself a god, and to the gods of Egypt who were gathered around there. But when Yaakov came, a miracle occurred, and the door elongated itself, so he didn't have to bow down. They knew he was a remarkable person. So let's see what the Alshich makes of that. That means to say the following thing. So if you look at the Pasuk, it says the Jewish people. But Yomer El Am, he says to his people, Hine, Am B'nai Yisrael Rav Otzim Menu. Let's think of our 4 factors that guarantee military success. 1 is unity. The people, the Jewish people, the singularity, the Amhud, the nationhood, they're unified, right? Shivim Nofesh, 70 soul. They're one Am. They have unity. And then they're B'nai Yisrael. Oh, that Yaakov, who was so close to God, who had incredible powers that stopped the famine simply by setting foot in Egypt, that Yaakov who, could, when he came to see the king, the door jumped out of the way, and many, many other midrashim that talk about the miraculous phenomena that accompanied Yaakov to his confrontation or his meeting with Pharaoh, that was noted. So therefore, the first worry is they are unified. The second worry, says Pharaoh, Yom al-Amma, when he's talking to his people, they're unified, they're Bnei Yisrael, they've got God on their side. Rav, they are more numerous than we are, and that's obviously a problem as well. But it says, interestingly, Rav. Well, the word Rav, as you can see in Echo, when the Pasuk says in Echo, a Rabosi Am, what's the Pasuk in Echo? In the Pasuk, right at the beginning of Echo, suddenly my mind's gone blank. Always a good idea, incidentally, when you're giving Shiurim, in case you ever, to actually have the book in front of you. But this is not too difficult to get hold of because it's the first Pasuk in the first chapter of Echo. And there it says, Echo Yoshua Bedad. How is it that it sits now in solitude on its own? Ha'ir Rabosi Am. A city which was Rabosi Am. Rabosi Am, normally translated full of people, but the Medrash translates it Rabosi as Rabosi Am, a wise people. How could this city filled with wise, the Jewish city with such Jewish wisdom, the people that got 40% or whatever, it's all Nobel Prizes, how could they have been brought to this? Rav also means wise. So they are unified. They are God on their side. They're wise. That was the third reason it could lead you to military success. But also, and mightier, more numerous than we are, the other crucial factors. So that's what he's addressing. We have a problem here. They have all the factors necessary in order to defeat us. Now, the question, if you remember one of the questions the Alshich asked that we looked at a second ago, why didn't they reply? But he said, why did it say the next word, hovo? Let us come. If he's talking to his own people, hovu it should say. And the Alshich says something brilliant. This is them speaking. He's done his bit. But the Jewish people are mightier and they've got all these factors that lead to military success more than we have. And they say, it's in the singular because now they're speaking, the Egyptians are speaking to him and saying, advise us, give us chokhmah, give us wisdom. What should we do? What can we do to deal with this? And Pharaoh, who is their leader, and Rabbi Dessler says in the Perek base of Mitzvah Eliyahu, the word Pharaoh comes from the word parua, which means to be uncovered, to be made naked. Pharaoh's cleverness, Pharaoh's wisdom, Pharaoh's technique was always to know exactly, he was a clever fellow, what the other person is thinking, as though they were standing naked in front of him. That's how they're able to control his society so effectively. He was a clever fellow. So he says, good, you want to be wise? This is what we're going to do. In order to make sure that they don't multiply. At this point, I think I'll actually stop sharing and read to you a bit of Alshich, because we should read a piece of Alshich. Why not? And it says the following thing. Quickly find good. Yeah. Where my marker is. Good. So he says the following thing. As Hashiba Amoy El Malcolm, they turn around and say to their king, Hova, you, give us guidance, give us a strategy, a plan to use against this Jewish people. Kaloimer, Hova, Loma, Esamalach, Koyach, give us from your wisdom, you're our leader, you're the cleverest guy. That's why we appointed you to be the king. Maybe they'll be so successful to destroy us. And he's not worried about the others. He's not worried about all these aspects we've talked about. And now he says, why? Pharaoh is saying and says to them, don't worry, they're in Egypt. And because they're in Egypt, they're toast. We don't have to worry about them. All the factors, I don't worry about them. Because there was a tradition that before we went out from Egypt, nobody was able to get out from Egypt. Not a tradition, was a reality. The mazel of Egypt, the there, I don't avoid Azora, and don't think avoid Azora was crude. It was incredibly sophisticated. Remember, the first few miracles of Moshe Rabbeinu they were able to replicate. They were an incredibly powerful society. We are told that had Hashem not taken us out precisely at the millisecond he did, we would have been lost. The strategy and their techniques and their power and their sophistication, their mystical power, their ability to do magical things, their ability to look into the future and see there was going to be a boy born called Moshe, and therefore that's why they drowned all the boys in order to try and get him. That shows that they were incredibly sophisticated people who had access to powers that we don't understand today. One of them is their mazel. Their mazel is the astrological force that played on the world, which incidentally, the astrological sign for that is the ram or the sheep. That's why they worship the lamb. Nobody is idiotic enough to worship a lamb. Sheep are pathetic creatures. But it was symbolic of the astrological force which has effect on this world. Other planets do affect things in this world. Imagine you could take the energy that flows to this world, the effect other planets have, like, for example, the gravitational force of the moon, and be able to manipulate that. They had amazing abilities, and they could do these things. But so Pharaoh says, don't worry about all that stuff, because the mazel of Egypt is so powerful, no slave is ever able to escape from Egypt, because our mazel is so powerful. And even the mazel was powerful. Rabbi Dessa quotes a medrash, which is a scary thought. Listen to this. The reason that Hashem himself passed over the houses to kill the Egyptian firstborn, and he didn't send a malach, he didn't send an angel, is because an angel would have been destroyed by the forces of Egyptian society. It was a bit like in Israel when terrorists fire missiles from Lebanon or Gaza into Israel. They've got the Iron Dome, and they've got a counter missile which knocks it down. And a malach of Hashem trying to come over Egypt, they had the ability to use the astrological forces, the mazel, to, as it were, shoot it down. Of course, they couldn't shoot down Hashem. This is interesting stuff. So Pharaoh says, I'm not scared about that, because our mazel is so, our mystical defenses are so intact. Our mystical Iron Dome is so successful. I'm not worried about them ever leaving. It just will never make sure nobody can ever leave Egypt. But then he says the following thing. Listen to this. But what we need, the strategy we need, we have to worry lest, just in case, they get so numerous and there is an attack. We have a war when we're attacked from outside, externally. As obviously does happen. Then the Jewish people will fight against us, just as he said in the Parshas. So I'll share the screen just to remind you of that, because I didn't read it with you. We'll do it now. Share the screen, and there we go again. So what did he say? He said, when a war will come along, they will join on El Sanena to our enemies, and they will fight against us and go out from the land. So let's stop sharing. Let's go back to read what the Alshich says here, because it's all nice mystical Kabbalistic stuff. And he says, maybe we'll have war from outside, they'll join in. And they'll fight against us. That's what we have to worry about. There's a war from one and two fronts. Internally, a civil war, the Jews attacking us inside, and enemies from outside. And they'll be able then to go out from the land. Oh, what about the mazel? These astrological forces that protect that no slave is ever able to escape from Egypt. Then they'll be able, because of that war, there'll be two forces that will join together. The mazel of the Jews, because they thought, of course, that we had our own mazel, that Hashem was not, they didn't recognize Hashem as being the ultimate force, just another one, mighty one, but another one. Therefore, their mazel could combine with the mazel of the invading army, and that's when our status quo, our Iron Dome that protects us, or protects the Egyptian borders from any slave ever escaping, that might now be in jeopardy. There's a new reality. So we've got to stop them getting so mighty. And of course, that's how they decided the strategies, welcome them in, be nice to them. And they did that. The 210 years was only the last 80 years. It was extraordinarily nasty for the Jews. And it was once we had jettisoned Hashem, or told Hashem, sorry, don't need you anymore. You're redundant. Hashem said, fine, okay. You want to put your trust in the Egyptians? Let's see how that works out for you. So that's Pharaoh saying here. But there's another insight into the wisdom and the strategy of Pharaoh at the time. You see, because they had the ability to look into the future, they saw that there was going to be a boy born who was going to save the Jewish people. And when I said before they killed all the boys at birth and having them drowned, that was all the boys, both the Egyptians and the Jews. And the reason? Because they had the powers that I told you about. They could look into the future. And when they looked into the future, they saw the boy that was going to save the Jewish people, and they were confused. He looked like a Jew, but he was dressed like an Egyptian. So was he an Egyptian or was he a Jew? They weren't sure, so they killed all the boys, their own included. Of course, it's a plan that doesn't work because you really can't outsmart Hashem no matter how clever you are and how wise you are. Because, of course, the reason that he looked like an Egyptian or he was dressed like an Egyptian was because Pharaoh was going to bring him up in his own palace. Hashem had arranged that. You really can't. Not a good idea to try and outsmart Hashem. You've lost. But the next stage in the story, if we go back to our story, I'll share the screen again, is the appeal to the midwives to kill the Jewish midwives to kill the Jewish babies at birth. And let's look at that because that's very interesting as well. So a little bit further on, here we go. So they enslave the Jews. That's this little bit here, and then in Posuk Tez Vov, Posuk 15. So and the king of Egypt said to the Miladas, to the midwives, however, yes, the Jewish midwives. The name of the first one was Shifra, and you probably know that was Yocheved, that was Moshe's mother. Shem Hashem is Pua, and the second one was Pua, that was Miriam, Moshe's sister. And Rashi says Shifra from the word Shipur, meaning to make beautiful. She used to beautify the babies, and Miriam used to go poo, poo, and coo to them, we would say in English, to calm them down and make them stop crying. And he said to them, when you give birth to the, or you what's the word? What the midwives deliver, that's the word. When you deliver the Jewish women, when you look on the stone, in Benhu, usually translated as a birth stool. Women often in other countries rather than the West often give birth sitting, squatting, as opposed to lying down. Obviously, that helps gravity to aid the process of birth. In Benhu, if it's a boy, and you will kill him, and if it's a bas, if it's a daughter, then you will allow the child to live. But these midwives feared God. Also, and they didn't do what they were told to do. What told them to do, and they kept them alive. Well, the Alshich's intrigued by the Hebrew here, so let's go over that and see what has intrigued the Alshich. Again, Vayomar Bayaldech, sorry, not there, sorry, here. Vayomar Melech Mitzrayim, and the king of Egypt said, Lumelodis, to the Melodis Haivres, the Hebrew midwives, Asher Shema Achos Shifra and Shema Shenis Pua. The name of the first one, Shifra Pua. What did he say? And he said, Vayomar Melech, he said to them, what? Oh, that when you give birth to the boys, why is it another Vayomar there? Why is it another Vayomar? Two Vayomars. Why another Vayomar? So here the Alshich gives an answer which is very interesting and based in a medrash, which is that he wanted to invite them to engage in this sexual immorality with them. That was the first thing he said to them, but it was only a hint. Then, in the second one, he actually then says the other thing he wants them to do. Now, the Alshich says, and you find this in other commentators like the Orachaim as well, that he gave them a hint how to kill the babies, how to know if it was a boy or a girl. The idea was, listen to this, that they would be able, by a technique that he showed them, to determine whether or not the child was a male or a female, and they would be able to kill the child inside the born, as the child was being born, before it was born, so that the child would seem to be stillborn and not realize that the midwives had killed them. That's the plan that he's trying to hatch. Another thing, interestingly, is called the names are interesting. The name of the first one was Shifa, and the name of the second one was Pua. That's interesting. I just told you that, as Rashi says, it was Yocheved and Miriam. So why not say Yocheved and Miriam? It's interesting. One of the most famous midwives in Jerusalem, her real name is Chalkovsky, but her nickname is Bambi. Bambi. I don't know why Bambi, but Bambi. Maybe it's the Hollywood character, the deer or something. It was a cartoon thing. Don't know. But anyway, she's famous, known as Bambi. Everybody knows who they are. These were the head midwives of the Jewish women in Egypt. If they could get them to agree to this plan, and more than that, he knew that as far as halacha is concerned, listen to this, he knew that to kill a baby inside the mother's womb is not as technically obviously a case of murder as after the baby's born. That seems to be his plan. But I'm going to divert from the Alshich a second, because I want to tell you what this sefer here, this is the Kermit Tzvi. As I've told you, I think in the past, my addiction to the Alshich was something I gained in Manchester. This is written by the first Manchester Rosh Hashiva, and his name was Tzvi Hirschferber. And he says something which is intriguing here. He quotes the famous Medrash, which says that the Jewish people were saved from Egypt because of three things. They didn't change their language, and they didn't change their dress, and they didn't change their Jewish names. They kept speaking Hebrew, and they kept their dress, and they kept their names. Incidentally, if that strikes you as being a contradiction to what we said before of them wanting to assimilate totally into Egyptian society, I once saw an account of somebody who talked about his father was a completely assimilated German Jew who'd fought, he was a doctor and fought in the First World War, got his Iron Cross. He and his wife committed suicide as the Nazis rose to power, not because they were terrified of the Nazis, but because they couldn't take being rejected by Germany. Utterly and totally assimilated. Once he writes that a Zionist came collecting money from his father, and he said his father abhorred Zionism. And anyway, what did he, a Stuttgarter, somebody from Stuttgart, got to do with Zionism? Got to do with Israel? Nothing to do, didn't touch his life at all. When the Zionists shouted at the father, "You're a typical assimilation," he said, "Of course, must be a typical assimilation. His expression was astonishing. I would support the complete assimilation of the Jewish people into Germany if it would benefit the Germans." However, I feel that leaving ourselves a little bit outside, we fertilize, we bring a different perspective that helps Germany. So it's not a contradiction that you could have Jews who would keep certain elements of the Jewishness to help Egypt. There wouldn't be a contradiction at all. But this is an astonishing concept, he says. If you go back here, and he says to the Egyptians, and again, the question is, what did he say? The second one tells you what he says. So we've got two Vayomers. What's the first Vayomer saying? So the hint, as I said before, the Alshich brings the Medrash that it was a hint that they should engage in adultery with him, sexual shenanigans, or whatever the word would be. But the Tzvi Hirschferber, he said, quotes a different Medrash. So it tells you what he said. He says that your name will be Shifra and your name will be Pua. He offered them great status and royal title within the Egyptian empire if they obeyed his command. The next passage tells us they were loyal to somebody much greater than Pharaoh, which is Hashem, and they didn't do what they were supposed to do, alleging, as the Apostle goes on to say, that the plan had leaked and they the woman no longer trusted him. And the Alshich, he says the fact they're called Shiur and Pua alludes to the fact that they were so famous they had these names. These were the most famous midwives in Egypt, and therefore nobody would suspect them that they actually were killing the children, especially in the womb, but nobody could see it. And he had given them this technique to know it's a boy and kill them in vitro. No, nobody would suspect them. That's what he says he was telling them. But there's another aspect to this. Let's go back to what we were saying before. The wisdom of the ancient world. They knew exactly how to corrupt the Jewish people. And in actual fact, it's no different to what corrupts them today. Here in the United States, we can see so many Jews who are totally, utterly assimilated, who become un-Jews, and very often will ally themselves to the enemies of the Jewish people within the American political system, and so on and so forth. Nothing really had changed. And there's an incredibly interesting story. I don't know if you've ever come across this. There was somebody called Rabbi Avram Shiur. Now, here's an interesting story. I've got it over here now. Go over it. I wrote about this. I've written about this in my new book, which is coming out. Saying I'm showing off my books tonight. This new book will be out just before Purim. Not available on Amazon, but in any good Jewish store. Somebody called Rabbi Avram Shiur. Everybody's heard of the Abarbanel. And the Abarbanel, of course, in 1492 led the Jews out into exile after they'd been expelled from Spain by King Ferdinand and Isabella. In 1492, there are three famous historical occurrences. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the launching, Americans will tell you, of course, in 1492 when Columbus sailed the Ocean Blue, the three ships, the Nina, the Pinto, and the Santa Maria, which sailed off, paid for by the Spanish monarchs to discover, well, they weren't actually trying to discover America, they just did so. And there's an irony, the Jews were being kicked out of one country, another country or a continent was going to be discovered at the same time, which eventually was going to produce tremendous refuge for the Jewish people. That's the story we all know. The Abarbanel, the chief rabbi, they sometimes say, of Spanish Jewry, led them into that exile. But there was another famous rabbi at the time, somebody called Rabbi Avram Shiur. He was a very close friend and colleague of the Abarbanel. Like him, he was what's called a tax farmer. We would just say he was the head of tax for the Spanish court, making Spain very rich. He himself, Avram Shiur, managed to fund the last Spanish army that kicked the last remnants of Muslim Spain out, the last Muslim army. And mainland Europe was kicked out by an army Christian army funded by Avram Shiur, a very, very rich man. He made the shidduch between Ferdinand and Isabella. That's the other thing that happened in 1492. The other thing that happened was Spain became a united kingdom. These two independent kingdoms that joined together, Ferdinand and Isabella, created and made a Spain. He brought that shidduch together. He also reconciled Isabella with her estranged brother, whom she had not spoken to for a long time. So you would kind of think that they owed him a lot. But just as you see in Egypt, as I said before, Egypt was the prototype or the blueprint for all exiles that come. They repaid his kindness by expelling his people and offering him the ability to stay. After all, he made them very rich, but in condition that he converted to Christianity. The Abarbanel, by the way, was offered the same deal. He didn't take it. But Rabbi Avram Shiur did. You can visit his house. I'm friendly with some of his great grandchildren, some of his descendants. You can visit his house and where you'll find the secret synagogue. So how sincere the conversion was, I'm very, very skeptical. But he actually embraced Christianity. His sponsors for his conversion were the King and Queen of Spain themselves. And he took the name of Fernando Perez Coronel Nunez, which was a dead royal princely title. So they made him a lord, a Spanish lord, and gave him a new name. And he was able to stay. Some people, why would they very interesting. His children, I know, found accounts that say, in actual fact, it wasn't that the King and Queen of Spain offered him the choice of converting to Christianity or leaving along with the rest of the Jews. The choice was far more evil than that. It was, in fact, you either convert to Christianity, or the Jews are not being expelled, they're all going to be slaughtered. It'll be a Holocaust. That's a very interesting halachic question. Suppose somebody says to you, you've got to worship an idol. You're supposed to give up your life rather than worship an idol or convert your religion. What would they say? We're going to kill 10 million Jews or 5 million Jews or 100,000 Jews unless you do. Interesting halachic question. That makes it, of course, a very different one. But why would they so much want him to convert? The answer is obvious. From a strategy of demoralization of the Jews, and maybe by doing so, if he does so, then they will follow in his footsteps, and many Jews will convert as well. If Pharaoh can get Yochebed and Miriam, if he offers them royal title, new names, Shifra and Pua, as says Reb Seher Schwerber, was the titles, the names, the royal names that they were now going to be given, if they would only be loyal to the king, to Pharaoh, and just do this little thing of killing Jewish boys at birth, and of course from that they would be able to get to other midwives and get them to do it as well. But they feared Hashem and didn't do it. Such an interesting catalogue of similar phenomena that happened at every exile. You can become an un-Jew and you can be absorbed into society. It's just you've got to oppose your own people. We can get that process to occur by being extremely nice to the Jews and welcome them in. And then when the Jews are so happy to be Americans or Germans or Greeks or all the rest, and tell Hashem to go, then Hashem will go, leaving them totally exposed and vulnerable. It's an old story, but it shows that the old people were just as clever as the new people. But it's the same strategy that you have today. And obviously it's the same way of getting out of it. And there are just some Jews, including every single one of you who's watching this share, who are the sort of, not un-Jews, but the real Jews, who would resist every single enticement and every single clever trick, Hovan Ischak Malo, that Pharaoh said to the people who appealed to him. What clever tricks have you got up your sleeve to trap the Jews? You'd reject it, Baruch Hashem, I would reject it. But so many Jews don't. That's the beginning of our exile. That's the beginning of the 80 years of hell and misery and the slaughter of 2,000 Jewish babies every morning and 2,000 Jewish babies every evening for Pharaoh to bathe in their blood for his leprosy. And still, at the end of the whole process, after the death of the firstborn, then we've got, during the plague of darkness, we've got 4/5 of the Jewish people die in the plague of darkness as well. Rashi says, but Rashi doesn't say that there's another opinion in the Medrash that they didn't die physically, they died spiritually. They decided to stay in Egypt and not come out. For them to be an Egyptian was the ultimate goal, even if it is you're an Egyptian slave. As long as I can attach the name Egypt to my name, that gives me greatness. Like that couple I told you about, true story, who committed suicide, as so many did, because they couldn't take being rejected by Germany. They had to be German. They were Germans first and foremost. And the same thing happens today. Same story, same strategy. And of course, knowing that strategy, for us, same ability to see through it and reject it. I shall look forward to us learning what the Alshich has to say in the rest of the story in the next few weeks. And of course, every week, so we carry on. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shemos.